we go. Thank you so much for coming to my talk today. And thank you, OPA, for having me. We're going to talk about the fixed star Scheat, the title O Scheat, hang on, a fixed star consideration, which I think is an interesting word. Consideration itself is derived etymologically from being with the stars. And I'd like to start off with a quote. This is from Hildegard of Bingen. Even in a world that's being shipwrecked, remain brave and strong. I think that's really good words for these times. Now, why Shiat? Why would I choose to examine this fixed star? At a certain point, when I was looking at the astrology for 2025, I saw all these transits happening on the cusp of Pisces and Aries, and I knew that there was a prominent, sort of notorious fixed star there that was going to be receiving all these conjunctions. Now, the astrology, obviously, all these planets moving back and forth into Aries over the world point is significant in and of itself, but my attention was drawn to this fixed star because it's hovering right there at the cusp as well. And I really thought this was like a cosmic exclamation point, a sort of double underline. Like, we really need to examine this fixed star because I think it's an integral thread woven into the tapestry of the astrological story of the times we're living in right now. So we're gonna look at Shiat as what it is, its history, myth, and symbolism. Why even consider fixed stars at all? And then we're gonna look at a couple events and then mostly nativities because I really like to look at artists and how they represent the energy of fixed stars when they're prominent in their charts because I think it really comes through in the expression of their creativity. And there's a communion that happens, and we can all benefit from it and learn more about the energy and nature of the fixed star. And then I'll conclude with some tips for navigating these times with Shiat so prominent and activated. Now, be warned, gentle viewers, listeners, some of this material may be graphic. Shiat is embodies, expresses some difficult energy. Not all doom, but it is can be kind of graphic sometimes. So just be warned. Also, a few puns. Shiat, as I first heard about Shiat in classes that I assisted for Kepler College, Marcos Patchett teaches a medical astrology class, and as well as Lee Lehman, and both of them were notoriously famous for saying Shia. It sounds just like what it is, right? Like, it's not generally considered a positive thing in medical, horary, mundane astrology. It has quite a reputation for being, dare I say, Shiati. So, what is Scheat? It's the second brightest star in the constellation Pegasus, and you can see this is from Stellarium here. This was taken of the night sky in my area recently. You can see the constellation in the southeastern sky kind of culminating. I think this shot was around 1 a.m. And you can see how tucked in it is. It's just the front half of the horse, Pegasus. And Shiat is in the upper right corner of the Great Square, which is the left shoulder of the Pegasus constellation, and it forms the right corner of the Great Square of Pegasus. It's a very prominent asterism. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it and has seen it. Shiat is been named in the modern parlance Beta Pegasi, and it is at 29 degrees and 44 minutes of Pisces in the tropical zodiac. It's a red giant. It's a huge star compared to our sun. And what I think is interesting about it is that much of its energy is emitted in the infrared. So that is another layer of scientific astronomical observation that I think is interesting to add to the star. It was discovered in 1847 as being a semi-regular variable star with a period of about 43 days, but that can vary all the way up to 2000. And its magnitude within that period goes from 2.31 to 2.74. It's 196 light years away. So those are the facts about Scheat. Now, why was Scheat brought to my attention? When I was looking at the transits for this year for Neptune and Saturn, I couldn't help but be taken by the back and forth motion across the Aries cusp and subsequently, as I've said, Scheat. And these are the dates. When I was compiling these dates for the three passes that both of these planets are making, I thought for a minute, oh, I think maybe, I'll take note of some events that happened, but we've all lived through the last 7 months. We know what's happened. It's kind of mind-boggling what's happened and the amount of global phenomenon, whether it be weather, political upheaval, turmoil, societal turmoil. Now, there's a lot of layers to astrology, and I do think that there are many moving parts and pieces. So this is just a snapshot of it in the grand tapestry of what's going on, but I do think that it is a worthy thread to pull on and see what these transits to Shiat might mean. It was also underscored by the Venus and Mercury retrogrades that went back and forth across that cusp as well, and also over Shiat. Now, what can Saturn conjunct Shiat mean? What can Neptune conjunct Shiat mean? Well, we're going to examine that as we go forward. But Saturn, I think we can consider themes of reckoning, containment, karma coming up. Neptune conjunct Shiat, dissolution, a collective grief, illusions, maybe breaking or ending, and Saturn and Neptune together also, I think there's some sort of crystallization or manifestation of the mystical and the dream. And the fact that Shiat is at 29 degrees, I think is very important to pay attention to. So another reason that I thought it was important to look at Shiat was that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020, which you see the chart here, kicked off an epoch, and this was called the Great Mutation. It started an 800-year cycle of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. They moved into an air sign, which will happen for 200 years. It kicked off a whole new cycle of 800 years of successive conjunctions in different signs approximately every 200 years. This is considered significant by ancient astrologers, medieval astrologers who tracked such time periods and the movement of these planets and their relationship to each other. And I was struck by the placement of the moon, a very fast moving body, exactly conjunct Shiat in this chart. So I was like, okay, another testimony, as they say. Um, we're in for a really Shiat-y time. Let's check this out. Now, additionally, because Shiat, although it's a fixed star, it because of the Earth's precession, the wobble on the Earth's axis, it moves approximately 1 degree every 72 years. So it's on the cusp of moving, or the Aries point is moving to meet Shiat. This is significant. We just had Regulus move in, the fixed star Regulus move into Virgo, and I think that it's um, important to pay attention to the fact that this star is going to be meeting such an important point, the world point. The Aries point is considered very important in mundane astrology, and it affects the collective and the whole. So this was yet another underline. So in 2044, this is the chart for when Shiat enters Aries, or the vernal point meets Shiat. It's sort of dependent on your perspective. So is this a time of Doom and gloom. Well, we shall see. Now, let's examine the mythology surrounding Pegasus, because that is the constellation that Scheat is a part of. And I think it's important and it informs the archetypes and the energy that Scheat brings forth. Pegasus was a son of Medusa and had a very sort of violent birth, as one does in Greek mythology. When Perseus decapitated Medusa, the Gorgon with the snakes for hair, Medusa's blood dropped to the ocean and out sprang two of her offspring, whom she was impregnated by Neptune against her will, coerced, and then punished for it by, it's drama, it's dramatic, it's Greek tragedy, mythology. So Pegasus was born out of blood, pain, and sea foam, which is a story very much like Venus being born out of Uranus's genitals. It's a very similar story. So I think that that's an interesting tie-in. Um, and Pegasus was also responsible, one of his superpowers was that his hoof could strike land and bring forth magical spring water that inspired incredible creativity. The muses lived at one of these springs, Hippocrene Springs. Hippo is horse in Greek, and on Mount Pelican, where allegedly Pegasus struck his hoof and this spring water came out of the mountain. Now, and the muses were muses because they provided inspiration to poets, artists, etc. But where did they get their juju from? It came from the spring that emerged from Pegasus's hoof. So that's an interesting part of the story. Now, so much art and iconography through the ages has centered around Pegasus, as well as a story of Bellerophon. And Bellerophon was a character, one of the heroes of Greek mythology, who was sent on various quests. And one of these quests, he was like, what am I going to do? And an old seer told him to sleep in the temple of Athena for guidance. Athena came to him in his dreams and gave him a golden bridle and said, hey, go to the spring. And when Pegasus is drinking, you'll be able to bridle him and he'll help you out. So he does that and captures, tames, gets an ally within Pegasus, and they go on and do all these great adventures. And you can see it in the art, this Renaissance painting at the bottom. It's also in this mosaic from, I think it was dated 300 to 270 BC, and then also in this fresco from Pompeii in uh, from the first half of the first century. So iconography throughout the ages, it's captured the imagination of artists to talk about this story. Also, so the Bellerophon story, he goes on to kill a monster with Pegasus's help, but after doing all these tasks, kind of goes to his head, and he decides he wants to go fly Pegasus up to Mount Olympus and hang out with the gods. Zeus isn't having any of that. The story is he sends a fly to sting Pegasus, who bucks, sends Bellerophon tumbling down, who lives, but he's kind of busted up, as one might imagine. And it's a real lesson, similar to Icarus, about flying too high and trying to exceed one's potential and hubris, if you will. I think it's also sort of an objectification of his ride, as just a means to get somewhere rather than appreciating Pegasus for Pegasus. So, I think that's it for mythology. Oh, Pegasus then becomes a carrier for lightning and thunder for Zeus, and Zeus is so pleased with him that he puts him up in the sky as constellation for his immortality. Now, I always like to look cross-culturally at these symbols because it's amazing when there is a flying horse present in all cultures. I think that brings in all that the qualities of that and can help enrich the archetype. In Tibet and Mongolia, there's the winged horse, the Lungta. El Barak, there's a winged horse that carries Muhammad. It's half mule, half donkey with wings on its back. And then I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Hindu names for their flying horses, but you can see them here, very prominent in Hindu mythology and also coming out of the ocean, which is an interesting aspect. Now, I will also say it came to my attention recently, and maybe someone can confirm that evangelical Christians in the book of Revelation have this whole thing about when Jesus comes back, he's going to return riding on a flying horse, which I think is interesting given current events and what's been going on, and how there's been some sort of ritualistic happenings to hasten these times with evangelical Christians, but I digress. So fixed stars, why consider them at all? And they have been prominent in astrology. Obviously, the Babylonians, Egyptians are all star cultures and thought the stars were deities. And Ptolemy in Almagest cataloged the stars, and this is the classic Ptolemaic cosmology, symbolic map of the cosmos, and you see the Earth at the center and the planetary spheres, with the outer sphere being the heavenly residence of God, and the stars are sort of in between there and the planets and act as an intermediary between the sort of eternal and divine and the lower, more faster moving planetos or wanderers. And I think that the planets act as a sort of channel when they are configured to these fixed stars. And this is a quote from a book that William Lilly edited from Aphorisms by Italian polymath Girolamo Cardano, and as a guide for astrologers for how to judge and use fixed stars in your astrological practice. And a big part of it is their magnitude and their colors, and that's how they were became associated with planets to try to understand their energy and their nearness to the ecliptic, because there are thousands and thousands of stars. How do you choose which ones to use? So I thought this was an interesting sort of protocol for how to go about thinking about using fixed stars and paying attention to them in a chart. Now, again, cross-culturally, I really like to look at how people thought of this area of the sky and what they observed, because they were obviously developing their astrology over thousands of years and basing it on observation. I don't know much about Chinese lunar mansions or Vedic, but I think it's interesting to consider what they had to say about them. The Chinese only used two of the stars from this asterism for their lunar mansion called encampment, but it was part of the northern mansion of the Black Tortoise or the Black Warrior of the North, and there is some association with it, the Black Tortoise carrying people through the underworld. So once again, there's this steed symbology happening, carrying people, transporting one to another place. Also, the Vedic lunar mansion, Purvabhadra, is associated with fleetness or quickness, and it means who possesses lucky feet, which I think is obviously an interesting tie-in with Pisces. And it is the 25th lunar mansion and symbolizes transformation, purification, wisdom, and self-mastery. And here we have some lengthy quotes. Forgive me, I don't like to give walls of text, but I think they are important when looking at the sources over the years of where the different definitions of the energy has come from. Manilius, the first century AD Roman astrologer, talked about very much how it was tied in with horses and being able to ride horses and really tame them and be in relationship with them as well as heal them. Now, Elspeth Eberton brings in the tying in with malefics. This is where we start to get more of the mundane interpretation in modern times about floods, shipwrecks, mining accidents, airplane accidents, suicide, drownings. There's a real, starts to be a real strong association with a self-undoing vibe. And I do think that consistently, those who do say that there's all these possible manifestations, sort of more doomy, horrendous manifestations of Scheat, the shipwreck star, as it became known, there's also this polarity where if you overcome some of this, if you have the capacity to uh, the strength to not succumb to these situations, then it gives you, confers on you great abilities and sort of this higher mind and creativity and inspiration. So I think that's something to think about in these times. Now, Bernadette Brady, of course, she is an icon in the study of fixed stars and sort of developed her whole system of parens, which is different from looking at conjunctions by zodiacal longitude, which is what I've been looking at so far. And as you can see here, she discusses from her book all the various perspectives on Scheat. And Vivian Robson, consistently, he's very doomy character. He wrote his book on fixed stars and constellations in 1923, and he consistently has, I'd probably say, the most negative, doom-laden descriptions, which I think is interesting. And we'll get back to that in a minute. Um, Eberton, once again, if you can overcome, then it affords you this great talent and power. And then Rieger, Bernadette thinks that his definition is being um, derived from the Bellerophon myth. Because if you can, losing and gaining friends rapidly, that's very like, oh, Pegasus, you're my friend. Oh, now you're not my friend. So that's where that layer of interpretation comes from. Now, Diana Rosenberg, another titan in the study of fixed stars, she devoted decades of study to it and is an icon also within the fixed star scholarship. And she gives an amazing list here, which I thought was interesting about the psychics and healers angle. Edgar Casey had a stellium in Pisces, but also his sun in earlier Pisces, his sun was on Scheat. So I thank her very much for bringing this exhaustive study of all the fixed stars to our consciousness. And she also underscores, yeah, some bad things can be associated with Scheat. Mental stability is a challenge. So here's the excerpt from Vivian Robson's book that I've highlighted, and you can see, yep, with Saturn. And this is related to natal astrology. Obviously, mundane has some serious implications as well. Shipwreck, tsunamis, floods, all manner of boating accidents and drownings. With mundane astrology here, he's very much very doomy, real downer. Nothing to to recommend Shiat in conjunction with any of these planets. And I have come across this before when I've examined the star Algol, which was um, probably the most notoriously doomy star ahead of Shiat. It's interesting that Shiat in the mythology is born of Medusa, whom the myth of Algol is based on. So I was like, well, I finally broke down. I'm like, well, what's Vivian Robson's chart look like? And so this is just as an aside. I think that it's an interesting note, like the filters we have as astrologers, just based on who we are, how we're going to interpret things. I thought this was an interesting footnote. I hadn't looked at his chart, and I don't know how many people have. And I think it speaks for itself. He's got some doomy words, right? All that energy, Sun, Neptune, Pluto, Mercury, all in Gemini at the top of his chart. He's known for the doom. So, but I was like, how bad is it? Oh shit. It's pretty bad, right? Like I was like, in my investigation, what are the most notorious shipwrecks I can think of? And I was like, oh, the Titanic, the Hindenburg disaster. And I pulled up the charts, and, you know, here we have Moon, very similar places applying to Shiat. And honestly, like, I was looking at the charts trying to figure out if tragedy on this scale that has become so iconic. I mean, obviously, the Hindenburg disaster is featured on a Led Zeppelin album cover. Everybody knows that. The Titanic is the shipwreck. Um, there's so many other things going on in astrology charts besides a moon conjunction a fixed star, but I don't know if I would necessarily say these were such spectacular disasters based on the other components of the chart, but maybe y'all can examine them some more and we can have a discussion about that. So now I wanted to move into some nativities because I think that it's an antidote to that kind of terror that maybe Shiat can instill when you hear all of the horrible negative things that are associated with it. And as the last two examples have shown, it can be spectacularly negative. So well, I did a deep dive in nativities of artists that I found Shiat to be prominent in, and it kind of blew my mind. Not just about Shiat, but the way that fixed star energy will find expression in artistic creativity. And so this is not the first time that I've found this, and it really begs the question of an animistic relationship. Like, can this energy wants to be expressed? Can we express it in a way that is on the lighter side rather than the darker side, and thus sort of give us a release valve? Can there be a visionary higher expression of Shiat and it doesn't lead to, there are many people who have Shiat prominent that aren't suicidal drunks. There are many who are, but I think that it's a good lesson in who masterfully navigates this energy. The first example is Rosa Bonheur. She was a French painter born in Bordeaux. And as you can see, she has Sun and Pluto. I would say Pluto conjunct Shiat pretty closely, Sun very closely. And she was known as a painter of animals, a very famous painter of animals. This is one of her most famous paintings, a horse fair. And it was 8 by 16 feet. She was allowed to paint and become very prominent in France at a time when this was unheard of for women. They were just not afforded the opportunities that Rosa had and took advantage of. Now, she was a very disruptive child. She was expelled from school numerous times. Her father allowed her to paint. He himself was a painter, so she had that going for her. But she was so exceptionally gifted. She started uh, painting and learning from painting copies of masters' work at the Louvre when she was 14. She was allowed to wear pants by the French government, which I thought when I read that, I thought that like I didn't know, obviously, yes, okay. Pants were illegal for women to wear in France at this time. And so she was allowed to wear pants. She studied animal anatomy and osteology in the abattoirs of Paris and the National Veterinary Institute. And she was also an open lesbian. For 40 years, she lived with her female partner, and at the partner's death, she moved in with another American female painter. So radical. This woman was breaking all the rules, but through the force of her extraordinary talent, she just was a total pioneer and trendsetter. And her paintings consistently are of horses. I mean, many different animals, but a lot of horses. And this is her most iconic painting, which kind of blew me away. There's something about the white horse, the white stallion, that is so integral to the constellation and the star itself. Another one, Albert Pinkham Ryder. Right there we get the name, okay? Like he's a but he was also known for his very poetic and moody seascapes and horse paintings. He had a very unique style, which was a precursor to modernism. He painted fewer than 200 paintings. He rarely signed them and never dated. He was a very eccentric person. And he worked on paintings for 10 years or more with this wet on wet style, and many of them haven't survived very well because he would put so many layers and a very different materials, candle wax, bitumen. Like some of his paintings 100 years later are still soft, they're still wet. So that's not great for them standing up to the test of time, and they look very different from when he originally painted. He was lauded as having this luminosity to his paintings that nobody else had achieved at that time. And I think it's interesting. There's a biography about him called The Painter of Dreams. So very Piscean, but also the Scheat energy is undeniable here. Now he very eccentric. He did seem to suffer from mental illness later in life. Uh, but here we go. You know, he didn't drown. He didn't kill himself. He didn't do anything horrible. He was painting pictures of horses. This one, I love this one. Odilon Redon, another French painter. He has uh, shot on his MC. It blew my mind when I saw this, and this is an A-rated chart to Albert Pinkham Ryder. We don't have his time of birth, so that was a noon chart. But he still had sun on Scheat. Redon has a very highly rated chart. I think it's a Rodden rating. And so he has Scheat on his MC. And if you look at any articles about Pegasus or even the astrology of Pegasus, everybody's using Odilon Redon's paintings, which I think is amazing. And he has a lot of them. It was one of his favorite subject matters to paint Pegasus. And on top of a mountain, right? Like at the top, right? Like Scheat is at the top of his chart. So he was very reclusive. I think he was very mystical person. He didn't interact with the public very much. One of his more famous paintings titled In the Dream and Night. He did suffer the loss of his infant son, and I don't think that that helped him want to interact with society very much. I think he left his wife to do a lot of the sort of art business of their life. But I think he's an amazing representation of the Scheat Pegasus energy and sort of channeling it and not really having a choice, right? Like, do you see the amount of Pegasus paintings this man produced? It was obviously like he was obsessed by it and driven to express this energy. And I don't really know what else in his chart would create that. It's very prominent that that symbolism was important to him. He painted plenty of other mythological, diffuse, ethereal subjects, but the sheer quantity of Pegasus drawings and paintings is notable. Next, we have Frida Kahlo and Selma Hayek. Obviously, Frida is everybody looks at her chart. We study it a lot because there's a lot to unpack there, and we know a lot about her life, and her art is very prominent. What I think is interesting is that she explored themes of gender, race, class in her paintings. She was going to become a doctor at 18. She was on her way to medical school and she got into a bus accident that left her in extreme pain and she had to have multiple surgeries throughout her life. Story is well known. She was also a revolutionary communist, and one of her last paintings was Marxism will give health to the sick. So I thought that was an interesting tie-in with Diana Rosenberg's observation about healthcare and interest in health. Now, Selma Hayek portrayed Frida Kahlo in the film made about her, and I just about fell out of my chair when I put their charts together and saw that they both have Saturn conjunct on Scheat, right? I was like, what is going on? What an amazing coincidence. So Selma is one of the most successful Latina actresses. She's made over 30 films. She is very prominent women's rights activist, and she also has an immense love for horses. I didn't include a photo here for copyright reasons, but Google Selma Hayek and horses, and you will see how much this woman loves horses, everything horses, riding horses. Okay. Now, once again, they do have this in synastry, this Mercury-Mars conjunction that's exact, which I think is interesting, but that's the only other exact conjunction like that other than their Saturns on Scheat. Wow. One more here, Annie Horniman. This was an interesting one. She has Neptune on Scheat, and she was one of the few people, even though generationally Neptune moves so slowly, you'd think that there would be more people to be found. But this is the one of the only and one interesting one, given the theme that seemed to be unfolding here. She was an English theater matron and manager. She established the Abbey Theater. Once again, very groundbreaking and amazing for a woman in her time. She founded the first regional repertory theater company in Britain and in Manchester. And she was sort of the patron and encouraged the works of playwrights like Yeats and George Bernard Shaw. Really radical for her time. She smoked a lot. She rode a bicycle in pants, which freaked everybody out. And she was also very into mysticism and alternative religions, and she was associated with the Golden Dawn group and used some of her money. She was inherited quite a bit of money from her family, and she used that to support the group and finance their venture. So another really radical female with Scheat prominent. And Neptune, I think actors, and now we associate Neptune with film, but of course, it's that illusion of stage also. So I found this to be an amazing example. Now, this is a list that I compiled, not exhaustive. There are many more that could be put on, but I found that it was an interesting list to consider of the various placements on Scheat. Some tragic, some not so tragic. Venus on Scheat, I think George Harrison is an amazing example because I included this logo for his record company that he established that's still in existence, the Dark Horse Records, and he at Venus on Scheat, and he has chose this as his logo, which is the Hindu multi-headed horse, flying horse. Um, Moon on Scheat, Hillary Clinton definitely, I think, has felt her share of emotional shipwrecks. Pete Hegseth, that was an interesting one to notate. So he's getting activated in all of this, and it would be interesting to go and look at the timing of Signal Gate and some of the other news stories that he's involved in and how they unfold as Saturn and Neptune traverse back across over his moon. Um, Sigmund Freud, there's so many stories here that I don't have enough time to go over. Uh, but there's always a horse connection, and it's really a little bit mind-boggling to, to the synchronicities and the coincidences. I mean, astrology is real, right? But it just lends strength to the idea that Scheat is a force and fixed stars are a thing. And when you have planets conjoined them, they're going to express that energy. Jane Fonda is a good one. She's an activist, women's rights, human rights. She filmed a famous, one of her early films, Barbarella, and she's flying around with Pygar, this character that has these huge white wings. Check out that movie. It's pretty amazing. Um, so many other interesting stories here. I don't want to run out of time though. Billie Holiday, Mercury and Mars obviously communicated a lot of pain and sorrow, dealt with her own addictions, but had incredible talent, right? Creative inspiration. Simone de Beauvoir, Moon, Mars, and Saturn on Scheat. She really wrote, manifested a amazing book on women and their position relative to men. So once again, that theme is kind of carried through. Vincent van Gogh, obviously incredibly talented, but himself, had some mental illness issues. Ascendant on Shia, Manuel Garrincha. He's a famous soccer player who was known as the Little Bird, right? And he was renowned for how quickly he could move on the soccer field. I thought that was interesting given the association with the lunar mansion there. MC on Shia, Sally Ride. She has a 22-degree Pisces MC. And so this was sort of an argument for a wider orb. Traditionally, a one degree orb is used. Now with stars like Algol, like William and Lily used a 5 or 6 degree orb because it's just so too much, But I was, maybe Shiat deserves a wider orb as well because Sally Ride, she's an astronaut, the first American woman in space. Her last name is Ride. There's this whole spaceship travel vehicle thread to these significations. Vesta on Shiat, Steven Spielberg. Once again, he's devoted to expressing space travel. The North Node was on Shiat for the Apollo 11 lunar landing. So I added that to my list, space travel of the significations. We could go in. There's more stories with Nietzsche, Dostoevsky that are fascinating, and maybe we'll tell them at another time. Now, Bernadette Brady uses parens with fixed stars, which is different from zodiacal longitude conjunctions, which is what I've been talking about. And it adds a whole other layer to thinking about fixed stars. And it's depending on where the stars are in relationship on the angles to when various planets are rising. And that is a completely another talk for another time. Her book is amazing. And her examples showing this are compelling. And she includes Kepler, Newton, and Einstein in her examples of prominent Shiat because of the parens system that she uses. And she talks about the square of Pegasus being, the number four and being grounding for intellectual thought and logic. So that she has an interesting take there, and I think it was worth mentioning. So keywords, and I would love to hear more keywords from you, from the audience, what you've come across or what is inspired in you. This is a list of what I've come up with from my research, diving into the biographies of these people, as well as the astrologers that have come before me and the work that they've done. And I think that this is useful because it is shows a broader spectrum than the negative aspects and the darker side of the manifestation of Shiat. And an important word is ally. I really think that that has not been considered as much in the treaties on Shiat, and that's the one that stuck out to me when I was considering how we can work with the energy of Shiat since it's so prominent right now in these times. And because Bellerophon enlisted the help of Pegasus, and I think he was punished for maybe not appreciating what Pegasus did for him or taking it for granted or objectifying him, like I said, and that not appreciating our allies. And isn't that a theme of the last 7 months too? But I think that that can, if we think about Shia as being an ally and a way to help us get in touch with our imagination and our visionary abilities, that can help us through these times. Certainly, we are experiencing a sort of a shipwreck, right? Like there's no denying. I don't think anybody can deny on so many levels, the environment, political, social, global, inter-country, between countries, everything is in a little bit of disarray. We're going through a little bit of a breakdown time. So how can we work with Shiat through this time? And I really like to consider astrological magic. I've studied the fixed stars as used by the Renaissance authors, and this is a list of the most popular ones. They've been used by practicing astrological magicians for hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years. And I'm always fascinated by who makes the list and who doesn't, right? Like you see some intense stars on here, Antares, Algol, but not Shiat, right? So um, Cornelius, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa wrote a treatise on the use of these stars in magic in 1531. All three volumes were printed in 1533, and it was on elemental, celestial, intellectual magic and looking at the materia to use to commune with the energies of these stars based on virtues or affinities with the stellar energies. And in order to affect intention, right? The mage has intention and sort of develops a relationship with these stellar energies to help bring that attention into manifestation. So why not Shiat? Now, a medical astrologer or a horary astrologer, and granted, if I see Shiat in a horary chart, I'll be like, depending on where it's at and what it's doing, I will take it as a malefic. But given that we've just reviewed that there can be more positive manifestations, I don't know that I would necessarily say, yeah, let's make a Shiat talisman or let's work with Shiat, let's, but aren't we all working with Shiat right now, whether or not we want to, right? Like that is the planetary conduit is activating it. Whether we want to be in relationship or not, we are, right? So how does one commune with Shiat? So I think it would be interesting to consider what materials one might use to represent Shiat if you were to do some sort of magical workings with Shiat. What would it look like? Because Shiat's not on this list, and I think it deserves some uh, associations. So that would be my suggestion to maybe consider what expresses materially the energy of Shiat. Now, I'd like to end with this quote from Johannes Kepler. I think it's an interesting one, especially and timely. And I thank you so much for joining me on this little journey that I've taken. We've come ashore. I don't think I've shipwrecked, which is fantastic. And I really appreciate that you were here for my talk. Thank you. And I'll take any questions.
Mary, we do have a question. First of all, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. You just absolutely, completely filled us with the magical, mysterious lore and meaning of Shiat. And absolutely, thank you so much for giving this presentation today. So we have a question. What would you tell someone whose north node is exactly conjunct Shiat at 29 degrees and 56 minutes? How would you advise them?
I would say you have a double dose of destiny. Elizabeth Hazel has a lot to say about fixed stars. That's fascinating. And her take on conjunctions in the natal chart to fixed stars is that y you might be more compelled. There's a destiny quality that's very strong, right? That maybe isn't so much there with people who don't have as many conjunctions to fixed stars. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like more freedom of choice is good, right? The North Node, depending on what culture you look at or what astrological system you use, the North Node can really be a driving, pulling force, right, to go forward, the dragon's head. So I think that there's an intense underline, cosmic underline there of destiny related to the energy of Shiat. And I would really look at, visionary artist. I think that we really need to, um, think about where we're going. And I realized that I skipped the slide and I want to share that again because it sort of brings me back to answering your question. How can you be in relationship with Shia? You obviously have it very powerfully prominent, right? So channel that multivalent expression, give it form, right? And imagine what else is possible and aspire to inspire, right? Like we're in the midst of this time of breakdown. So, but we're going to need a vision to build things back up. And I think that you are not just that you have North Node on Shiat, but you're getting all these transits too. So I think that your fate and destiny I would say is really tied in with what's happening for the collective right now.
Mary, we have another question. Um, uh, the Kim asks, it is conjunct her IC at 28 degrees. Would you suggest that this is why she might have career challenges?
That's an interesting question. Perhaps. I would look at you, and you're about to have an eclipse right on your MC, then, right? The upcoming, that's another cosmic underline, the Virgo eclipse at 29 degrees at the end of the month. Yeah, totally. and it me I don't know what your living situation is or what your home life is. I also have a Shiat in my fourth house, and Saturn being there has been a real downer. It's been a real weight of gravity. So, and inhibitive of 10th house matters. So, yeah, what's the workaround? You might want to consider working with Shiat if it is manifesting poorly in your life. I know there's planetary remediation. Why couldn't there be stellar remediation in the same way? People work with Algol, which is the most fearsome star in the heavens because it can offer great protection. So I think that now I caution you, just since I decided to do this talk and I was looking at this, I've been laughing at myself and like, oh shit, what have I gotten myself into? Like it's strong energy, right? But I think that, like I said, we're all being called to do the dance. Like no one gets out of it.
And then Peggy Lynch says she has Venus at 29 degrees Pisces and Sun at 4 degrees Aries. It has been a fun time already. Do you have any words of wisdom for her?
Oh, hang on. Be resilient. It's we'll see what it's like on the other side. We're in the middle of this. Like Saturn and Neptune are retrograde and about to make their second pass. Neptune is going to hover very close within 11 22 minutes and then station. So it never really leaves Shiat for the duration of its second and third pass. It's really just one big pass. Um, I would make friends with all the players as much as possible. How do you do that? I'm a big fan of planetary remediation. Neptune and dealing with the malefics, that is sort of next level astrological magic. The astrological mages didn't really give us a playbook for that because, of course, the outer planets weren't happening. I think they probably would have if they were around. They can be such intense transpersonal energies, vortexes, that it's difficult to know when how to personalize it, right? But I have Neptune conjunct the ascendant, so I've lived with it my entire life. Uh, and trust me, there are higher and lower manifestations of it. I would really cultivate, a visionary practice. My suggestions for uh, navigating these times, like activism. Honestly, if you look at the women that personified a lot of this energy, they were very devoted to standing up for themselves. And so, like, there has to be a component of that. Saturn is all about maturation, right? And I think that Neptune is, I think, cultivating ultimate compassion for everyone. And certainly we're in a period of time where it's more important now than ever. And I think that all of this action over Shiat and then Shiat moving into Aries, like I really hope that out of the suffering that we are creatively inspired to rebuild with a positive vision, like we are drinking from the wellspring of higher creativity and really envisioning what even like day to day nuts and bolts, what would you like your life to look like? That's what I'm doing. It's not easy, right? Like it takes a lot to combat the daily maelstrom. Literally, it feels like a Shiat storm. Right? I mean, there's endless puns that can be made, but I think that I'm an artist and I find great solace in it. And I do think after looking at these artists, like even if people are like, I can't draw a line, something artistic, some artistic expression and visionary expression. And something about political turmoil. I do think Bear it creates incredible art, and art is what touches people directly and impacts them and perhaps changes their hearts and minds more directly than anything else. So I'm a big fan of cultivating an artistic practice as a devotional way of being in relationship with these energies.
Fantastic. One final question, if you have the time. Can you comment on Barron Trump's Sun conjunct Shiat? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Right, yeah, that was an interesting one. I threw that in there. That one and Pete the Hegseth's moon. I think that obviously that I would say that they're somehow entwined in the story. I mean, he already is, obviously, but more to come, right? Much as I might not like to say that, but it'll be interesting to play out because they when I saw those the personal planets, I'm like, wow, that's going to be really interesting to see how their story unfolds as part of the larger whole. Um, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. He's been hiding out. We haven't seen much of him lately, which is maybe that sun in Pisces at Don Chiat. Maybe he's taking a ride with Pegasus somewhere.
Well, thank you again so much, Mary. It has been such a pleasure to listen to you today, speaking on Shiat and illuminating the star for us. A reminder for everybody that this presentation will be available for you to re-listen to when you like, and hope to see you again. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Dorje. Thanks, everybody.